Hello and welcome to this food law video where we're going to be talking about the impact of Brexit on different food products. And Katrina and I have assembled a few products just to run through a few points that are going to come up and are going to be impacted in the event that the UK exits the EU without a deal. So maybe we just start off with something simple like the address of the food business operator, Katrina, because at the moment you are required under the food information regulations to put on an address in the EU.
Exactly.
But of course, following Brexit, it's not quite as straightforward as that.
No, it's not. And actually, the food manufacturers that want to sell in both the EU and the UK will have to consider how to address this in their labelling because, assuming we leave with no deal, the current position is that in the UK to sell food here, you would need a UK address of a food business operator or the importer. Conversely, to sell in the EU, you would need what will be an EU address, i.e. not a UK one, an EU 27 address for the same a food business operator or the importer.
So we've got this product we found, a jam product, so it's well known. I'm sure many people have this in their cupboards. And this is quite a good example where, there are two addresses on this. It's not necessarily as part of Brexit planning. There could be many other reasons why this company, of course, have put two addresses on it. But, it's a good example here that you've got a UK address on here, you've got an Irish address on here, which in a post-Brexit, no-deal world would mean that this labelling is at least compliant from an FBO perspective.
Yeah, and can be sold in both territories, which is, the pragmatic solution, of course, for food business operators that only want to have one label, is to actually have both addresses on that label.
And do we know anything within the UK market, because there will obviously be a lot of product on the market, what are the government saying in terms of product that's placed out on the UK market that just has an EU address on?
So the current guidance is that we will have a transition period in the UK, so there will be a period of time when existing labels with EU addresses on will continue to be acceptable, and it's currently thought that that will be 6 months.
So practical advice really for businesses is that if you are not already doing so, you want to really start thinking in terms of your label layout. If you've got a print run coming up, how are you actually going to put additional addresses onto your product label? How is it going to fit?
Yeah, no, completely.
Okay, let's move on. Maybe, shall we touch on the thorny topic of tariffs, maybe?
Yes, yes.
Tariffs are such a big issue for the food industry. And, I think there's been a lot of discussion in the press about, actually the amount of food that is produced here in the UK. And it's 60% of what we consume is produced in the UK. And sure, there are lots of discussions around ways of increasing that number, but there's also, I think, a healthy sense of realism here that unless we are all going to massively change the way we eat in terms of seasonality, and unless we don't have the same kind of consumer expectations about seeing product on the shelves all year round, then we are going to still be importing food. And of that 40% of food that is imported into the UK at the moment, at least 3/4 of that comes from the EU.
Well, exactly. We've got an example here, actually, some tomatoes that have been imported from Holland. And of course, tomatoes are a very good illustration of this issue because they are perishable. And we are very reliant on what's called a just-in-time importing process, i.e., that you're importing things so they are super fresh and hit our supermarket shelves when they still look like this. And that is going to be a huge challenge when we're talking about putting custom borders up. Regardless of any tariffs that need to be paid, there's actually, getting through that process as well.
Quite. So the non-tariff barriers, the extra admin that's going to be involved, the extra paperwork, potential delays as lorries are sitting in Calais, and then you look at the alternative cost of air freighting some of this produce, which is hugely expensive. The kind of consequences begin to sink in about how big an impact this is going to be. But then we've also got the tariff rates themselves, and we've picked a very sort of simple product. This is just a tinned rice pudding, which in effect contains 3 ingredients: milk, rice, and sugar. But at the moment, if all of those ingredients were coming into the UK and then being produced and made into this rice pudding, providing all those ingredients coming from the EU, they would be tariff-free.
Yes, at the moment they would be. And interestingly, there would still be some things, even if we have a no-deal Brexit, that would be tariff-free. So, for example, if one takes the assumption that we would adopt the EU's current WTO position, so there'd be no trade deals to rely on, then under that current position, for example, if you brought milk in from Germany, there would actually be no tariff on that. But the sugar from France, you would be paying €15 per 100 kilograms on that. So that's quite a significant tariff. And if you got your rice from Spain, you'd be paying €145 per 1,000 kilograms, but only up to a certain threshold. So the tariff situation is, well, first of all, expensive, but it's also very complicated. And it's a whole sort of administrative burden that food business operators will need to get to grips with if we end up with a no-deal Brexit.
And of course, that additional cost and the cost in that scale in particular is likely to be passed on to the consumer.
Oh,
so
yes.
Not only will the consumer potentially be having empty supermarket shelves or less choice in products, but also that they may well find that a lot of their products are more expensive as well.
They probably will.
Okay, what about something a little bit different then? Maybe looking at CE marking.
Yes.
And I think that, CE marking isn't something you would normally associate with food, but of course CE marking applies to certain products. It's a way of demonstrating that a product complies from a conformity perspective, and if it meets certain essential requirements that are set out in a directive, then a company is entitled to put a CE mark on it. But of course, this is a well-known children's chocolate egg, which has got a toy in the middle of it, and toys are CE marked.
Yes.
They are required to be CE marked. Now, CE marking is something inherent to the European Union, and we've had some indications already from the government that we will not be continuing with CE marking. We're getting a new mark.
We are indeed, and we're getting a UKCA mark, which we understand the requirements will be very, very similar to the EU, at least initially. But it does mean that, again, the packaging will need to change. So that logo will need to come off for products sold in the UK and replaced by the new UKCA mark.
Or both.
Or both, yes. So it may well be that pragmatically manufacturers do exactly what they did with the jam and the addresses and put both on. But all of this takes up space on the label and means that other information that you might want to communicate, there won't be space for that.
So potentially lots of changes then from a labelling perspective, as well as thinking more broadly about some of the implications in the supply chain.
Exactly, yes.
Well, thank you very much. That was a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through some of the Brexit issues, but we're sure to be covering more of the Brexit implications in later food videos. Thank you.